Most people are not aware of it or haven't thought very carefully about it because it doesn't seem to matter to us.
Cathie Wood, a name synonymous with forward-thinking investment strategies, has just dropped a bombshell that's sending shockwaves through the financial world. She's not just talking about a recession, she's warning of an economic apocalypse that's beyond anything we've ever seen. So why do we need to pay attention? Because the numbers paint a grim picture.
To us, this is getting to be so serious that we are reaching a cathartic moment, and I do think it's started. Let's just look at the numbers first. M2 growth peaked at 27% in 2020 and has been...
In 2020, we saw M2 money supply growth peak at an astonishing 27%, a rate of monetary expansion that's unsustainable in the long run. Fast forward to now, and that growth has plummeted, potentially dipping below 3%. This isn't just a red flag, it's a siren call, signaling that without significant changes, we are heading towards an economic slowdown that could dwarf past recessions. The end of the economy is worse than anything we've ever seen. So, what does this mean for us? Are we looking at a repeat of history, or is this the dawn of an unprecedented economic shift? We will be breaking down Cathie Wood's warning, the numbers, and what this means for investors, policymakers, and regular people like you and me in the coming days. First up, let's talk about the warning signs Cathie Wood has identified. You've probably heard about recessions, right? Well, Cathie's talking about something that might just be a whole lot scarier. She's been looking at the numbers, and what she's found isn't just worrying, it's a bit of a bombshell. So first off, Cathie's been tracking this thing called M2 growth. It's basically a fancy way of saying how much money is floating around in the economy. Back in 2020, this number was shooting through the roof, up by 27%. That was when governments were pumping money into the economy like there was no tomorrow, trying to keep everything afloat during the pandemic. Fast forward to now, and that growth has slowed to a crawl, maybe even less than 3%. That's a huge drop. And it's got a lot of implications. There's not as much money to spend or invest, which is very important for keeping the economy going strong. But it's not just the numbers that are ringing alarm bells. It's how people are reacting. Both businesses and regular folk like you and me are starting to tighten the purse strings. We're not spending like we used to, and we're trying to save more, just in case things get rough. This shift in mood is a big deal because it shows that confidence in the economy is starting to wobble. When people and businesses get nervous and start holding back on spending, it can actually make things worse, kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, Cathie's also pointed out something pretty odd about the money supply itself. Usually, you'd expect it to keep growing over time, right? But for the first time in a long while, we are seeing it actually shrink from one month to the next. This isn't normal, and it's not great news for economic growth. And then there's the Fed, the people in charge of the US monetary policy. Cathie thinks they might be making a big mistake with how they're trying to handle inflation by tightening up on the money supply and hiking up interest rates. It's a bit like trying to slow down a car by slamming on the brakes. If you do it too hard, you might just cause a crash. She's worried that we're heading down a path that could lead to a lot more economic pain than necessary. Looking back, we've been here before in a way. The Fed had to fight inflation in the past, like back in the 20th century. But the situation today is different, and the economy's more fragile. What worked back then might not work now, and the stakes are high. So, what Cathie Wood is saying is pretty clear. We're not just looking at a regular downturn or a typical recession. We are potentially facing something much bigger. Something that could shake the economy to its core. And with the way things are going, with money tightening up and everyone getting more cautious, it's a warning we should all be paying attention to. Alright, moving on to the next bit, which is all about how technology is playing a huge role in all of this. Now, you might be thinking, what does tech have to do with economic downturns and all that financial stuff? Well, it turns out, quite a bit. You see, Cathie Wood and her team at ARK Invest are big on how innovation and technology are shaping our future. But while tech is booming and changing the game in so many ways, it's also causing some ripples in the traditional economic models we've got. Think about it. From AI to renewable energy and biotech, these aren't just cool gadgets and science projects. They're industries that are growing fast and changing how we work, live, and even how our economies function. Now, let's throw some numbers into the mix. Consider the growth rate of the tech industry. Over the past few years, we've seen double-digit growth in many tech areas. This isn't just impressive, it's transformative. But with big growth comes big changes, and not all sectors or workers can keep up. This mismatch is part of what's stirring the pot economically. Then there's the investment in tech. Studies show that billions are being poured into tech startups and innovations. This is great for pushing us forward, but it also means a lot of traditional businesses and jobs are being disrupted. It's a bit of a double-edged sword. On one hand, you've got incredible advancements and opportunities. On the other, there's uncertainty and the challenge of adapting to a rapidly changing landscape. And here's another interesting point: the role of digital currencies and blockchain. You've probably heard of Bitcoin, Ethereum, and all that crypto buzz. Well, this isn't just trendy tech stuff. It's starting to have a real impact on financial systems and how we think about money itself. Some experts are saying that the rise of digital currencies could challenge the traditional banking system and even how governments manage monetary policy. But it's not all doom and gloom. With challenges come opportunities. The tech revolution is also opening up new markets, creating jobs in areas we couldn't have imagined a few decades ago, and driving efficiency and sustainability. We need to be smart about how we handle this change and make sure we use technology to help our economies while also keeping an eye on those who might get left behind. To really get what's happening now, we've got to take a trip back in time. Think about the 1970s, a period that was pretty rough economically.
Monetary policy seemed to be on automatic pilot back then. The dollar was getting crushed toward the end of the 70s, adding to the inflationary fire.
Back then, the aftermath of the Vietnam War and a bunch of ambitious social programs under the Great Society banner kicked off a cycle of spending like there was no tomorrow. This led to some serious financial headaches, including sky-high inflation and a pretty unstable economy. It was a time of big fiscal and monetary moves, trying to keep the ship afloat, but often just making the waves choppier. The situation is very different now. Cathie Wood points out that the way money's moving around in the economy, or more accurately, the way it's starting to slow down, is something we haven't really seen before. After years of pumping money into the system to keep things running, suddenly it's like someone's hit the brakes. We're seeing a shutdown in both monetary and fiscal policy that's pretty unusual. The comparison to the past is what really opens your eyes. The economic chaos of the 1970s was crazy, but what is happening right now makes me think we might be in for something even worse. Back then, despite the fiscal and monetary frenzy, there was a sense of action, doing something to tackle the problems head on. This piece of history is very important because it shows that history does not always repeat itself exactly, but it does often rhyme. Now let us talk about inflation, which is something that everyone has been thinking about lately. Now, Cathie Wood has been talking a lot about this, and she's got some pretty strong opinions on how we're handling it. You might remember a guy named Chairman Volcker from history class or somewhere. He was famous for getting inflation under control way back in the late 20th century. He did it by making some tough choices that really put the brakes on how fast prices were going up.
Chairman Volcker did choke off money supply and killed inflation.
According to Cathie Wood, things are not the same as they were back then. The world's changed a lot. We're more connected. Our economies are tied together in ways they never were before, and the problems we're facing are way more complicated. To fight inflation now would be like attempting to solve a puzzle whose pieces are always moving. She's worried that the people in charge might be looking at the past for answers, thinking they could do what Volcker did and get the same results. But it's not that simple. The inflation battle today is tangled up with all sorts of global issues, from supply chain problems to changes in how we use energy, and even how diseases like COVID-19 mess with the economy. So, when Cathie talks about inflation, she's really pointing out that we can't just use the same old solutions for new problems. We've got to think differently and understand that the economic challenges we're facing now need new ideas and approaches. It's a big deal because getting this wrong could make things a lot tougher for all of us, from how much we pay for groceries to how secure our jobs are. Now, let us discuss the importance of preparing for a significant development in the economy that many of us have not yet witnessed. Cathie Wood's been giving us a heads up, saying we're heading into some really choppy waters, and it's not just our regular storm. This is something bigger, kind of like an economic apocalypse that's not on everyone's radar yet. So, what is the game plan? How do we get ready for something we can't even see coming? First off, staying informed is key. It's not just about watching the stock market go up and down. It's about understanding those big, complex economic signals that tell us what's really going on. And yeah, it can be a bit overwhelming with all the jargon and numbers, but it's about keeping an eye on the big picture. Next up, being smart with your money is going to be super important. This isn't the time for wild spending or risky bets. It's about being cautious and making sure we've got a safety net. Think about diversifying what you've got invested. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, right? And building up some emergency savings is a good move. You know, that rainy day fund can help you ride out the storm. And here's something else to consider: focusing on long-term financial health. It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day or panic when things look bad. But making decisions with the future in mind, like savings for retirement or investing in things that grow over time, that's what's going to help us get through whatever comes our way. So, wrapping things up, preparing for this unseen economic challenge is about being smart, staying informed, and making careful choices. It's about looking out for ourselves and our future, no matter what comes our way. What are your thoughts on Cathie's predictions? Do you think we're headed for an economic apocalypse? Or is there a way to minimize the impact? Drop your comments below, and let's get this conversation started. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more insightful content like this. Until next time, stay savvy and stay safe.